when the international community gives Iran a pass for all of these things, the ballistic missile testing, the arms sales, their support of terrorism, and they look the other way, all in the name of keeping a deal, then you're looking at something that's too big to fail. And that's the problem, is what we're trying to say is just because we all made the deal, just because that was done previously, it doesn't mean you don't go back and look and say, is it still working?
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. The latest moves by the Trump administration are keeping the planet on edge. This week, Donald Trump made a big show of disavowing the Obama-era deal with Iran that erased sanctions against the country in exchange for limits on its nuclear program, but stopped short of unraveling it, kicking the can to Congress, as Trump tends to do.
We're going to see what happens. We're going to see what they come back with. They may come back with something that's very satisfactory to me. And if they don't, within a very short period of time, I'll terminate the deal.
Meanwhile, there is the looming prospect of nuclear conflict with North Korea, who we have zero diplomatic relations with, and who on Friday renewed their threat to launch ballistic missiles near Guam. And Mr. President, if you're listening to the TV, Guam, like Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, are part of the United States, It's bad enough that Trump is fighting with Tehran and Pyongyang, but even worse that during this critical moment of world instability, he's also trading barbs with his own Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson. And that could lead to a much more dangerous crisis, according to Republican Senator Bob Corker, who said Trump's statements on foreign policy, quote, castrate his Secretary of State, posing a threat to national security. And joining me now is David Frum of The Atlantic, Rosa Brooks, former Pentagon official and author of How Everything Became War and the Military Became Everything, Tales from the Pentagon, Michelle Bernard of the Bernard Center for Women, Politics and Public Policy, and E.J. Dionne, Washington Post columnist and co-author of the great new book, One Nation After Trump, along with Gabriel Sherman of Vanity Fair. A power-packed panel. 5 folks here to talk with. I want to start with that castration comment, just because why not, right? That's the news cycle we're living in right now. And this is the full quote. It's cut one for my producers, and it says, this is from the Washington Post on Friday. As Corker sees it, the biggest problem is that Trump is neutering his chief diplomat, Secretary of State Rex Tillerson, thereby inviting binary solutions in which the United States will have to choose between a war with North Korea or Iran capable of threatening the United States with nuclear weapons. You cannot publicly castrate your own Secretary of State without giving yourself a binary choice, Corker said. And this was Rex Tillerson this morning. He was on CNN and was asked about that particular quote, and this is what he said.
He said that the president has, quote, castrated you before the world stage. That's his word, not mine. What's your response to that?
Well, as I indicated earlier, Jake, I think this is an unconventional president. He uses unconventional communication tools. He uses unconventional techniques to motivate change. And for people that have been around Washington a long time, this is a place that you know better than I. You've been here longer than I have. This is not a place that likes to change.
You have a cattle ranch. You don't want to say anything about the senator suggesting you've been gelded before the world? That's not anything that bothers you?
I checked. I'm fully intact.
I don't have a question. I'm just going to throw this out to whoever would like to respond. Anyone?
Too much information.
Too much information. But, you know, on this point, Rosa, since you did speak up, you know, I mean, the issue is whether or not the Secretary of State actually speaks for the President of the United States. It's actually a serious issue that folks in Qatar would like to know. I'm sure the folks in Iran would like to know.
Joy, nobody speaks for the President of the United States. Nobody. And in fact, Tillerson in an earlier iteration, this is just a few weeks ago, it feels like years ago already, but said precisely that, said the President speaks for himself. You know, I don't, and that was in the context of trying to distance himself from some of Trump's more objectionable comments.
Yeah, absolutely. And Gabe, you wrote a piece in Vanity Fair this week in which Donald Trump is quoted by aides as saying, I hate everyone in the White House. And that in your piece, it said that he is unraveling. And part of that unraveling is the supposed being called a moron by Rex Tillerson, which came supposedly after a meeting in which he said he wanted more nuclear weapons. Is Rex Tillerson at this point fully present as the Secretary of State, or is he just trying to find a way to get out?
Joy, well, that's a great question. I talked to a very senior administration official just in the last several days who referred to Rex Tillerson as, quote, completely checked out. And I think you saw that in his body language in his interview with Jake Tapper. I mean, this is a Secretary of State who's making it very clear that his relationship with the President of the United States possibly is irrevocably damaged. And I think the question for all of us, though, is, you know, the damage in this relationship has serious implications given the stakes of the issues on the table, whether it's the Iran deal or the escalating crisis crisis in North Korea.
Yeah, let's start with Iran. David, I'm going to start with you on Iran. Is there any evidence whatsoever that Iran is not complying with the deal that we made with them?
They are complying with the deal that was made with them. Unfortunately, that deal omitted many of the things that we should care about most. What Iran did with the huge windfall of revenues, maybe almost $100 billion, it received as part of the deal, has been not to invest at home, as was promised by some of the deal supporters, but to massively, radically increase its military budget. And they've become more adventurous, both conventionally on the rampage in Yemen and in Syria, and also with a program of missile testing. So the problem is missiles are not part of the deal. Generally, Iranian behavior outside of its borders is not part of the deal. And so when you see that one of the consequences of the deal has been to empower Iran to act worse in areas not covered by the deal, yeah, technically they're complying with the stuff inside the silo, but all the things outside the silo, which those of us who criticized the deal at the time warned about, those things are going just as badly as we feared in 2015.
But I have to ask this question. I'm going to go back to you quickly on this, Rosa, because isn't it likely then, the logical conclusion I would come to, just as a layperson, would be if they're complying with the deal itself, and then you trash the deal, we decide we're going to cut off the deal, doesn't that encourage Iran to do more missile testing? Because the implication for them, if you're in Tehran, is this country wants to go to war with us. So we'd better have some missiles tested. We'd better actually ramp up our military activity, because this country wants to invade us. They did, after all, under a different president, invade our neighbor.
No, I think that's absolutely right. And I think that on a separate track, you continue to work on the issues that David raised, which are real and which are problems, but don't take apart something that is better than the alternative on the nuclear stuff. And I think one of the things that's really striking to me when you look at Secretary of Defense Jim Mattis, he's someone who has been viewed for many, many years as a hawk on Iran. You know, he takes the issues that David raised incredibly seriously. He also has been one of the strongest voices arguing to President Trump for not scrapping the deal, because the alternative is even worse, and we do have other avenues, both diplomatic and military, to work on the other stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Could I say, first of all, let the record show that the good anti-Trump conservative David Trump took a really good right-wing position right here today.
I disagree with David.
And I think the problem with that position is twofold. One, we would like to get a deal with North Korea, and the notion that we make a nuclear deal and then walk away from a deal is not going to help us with North Korea. Secondly, we can't just bust this deal and expect good things to happen. We have a lot of other countries who are our allies who are also on this deal. And David conceded right off the top that Iran is living within the confines of this deal, meaning that they will not have a nuclear weapon for something like 15 years, maybe more. This is a big thing for the United States, for our allies. And if you just bust this deal the way Trump is suggesting, and he really was a little of this and a little of that in this statement, it's a lot of words. We still don't know where this leads. He kicked it to Congress. But if we bust this deal, the consequences inside Iran and whether the forces hostile to the regime have any chance of going forward, we are making things much worse inside.
And let me just read you, and I'm going to go to Michelle in a second. The president of Iran, Hassan Rouhani, issued a statement via Reuters saying no president can revoke an international deal. Iran will continue to respect it as long as it serves our interests, is what he said in a live television address. And I come back to the fact that if you bust a deal they're complying with, it would incentivize them to prepare for war, and it would incentivize North Korea to not ever make a deal with the United States, because we will have demonstrated we won't live with it.
That we won't abide by our agreements. And in no way am I defending, Iran or North Korea, but from the world perspective, you have to imagine that these governments are sitting back and saying, we knew what the Carter Doctrine was. We knew what the Obama Doctrine was. We knew what the Bush Doctrine was. What is the Trump Doctrine? Crazy won't do it. Maybe the Trump Doctrine is castration, since that's the term we're throwing around with foreign heads of state. If we don't know what the Trump Doctrine is, all we know is that he's put, he uses very stark and drastic language. He wants to pull out of deals. He taunts North Korea about the possibility of a war. His own chairman of the Foreign Senate Relations Committee is saying that Donald Trump might lead us into World War III. What incentive then is it for Iran to sit back and say, if you pull out of this deal, we're going to continue to be good world citizens?
David, and then I have a question for
If we were dealing with a normal Republican president, what you would
normal
say
is that
you would say the alternative here is not busting up the deal or living with the deal. The alternative, because look, the problem with the deal, and you can't exit the deal the way you entered it, is precisely, and the Obama people designed it so that the benefits to Iran all came up front. The benefits to the United States are phased in gradually over a long period. So we are trapped with this deal because they will still have the $100 billion that they are using to finance their rampage.
That they could also use to finance a war with us, because that's what it looks like is on the table.
We're not here at a court of law. The point is, it is money that they didn't have before.
No, but the president keeps implying that somehow the United States
just
handed over frozen money. I just wanted that clear.
It's frozen. It's a resource for destruction that we were able to withhold from them and that we have now given them. So what would a normal policy look like? And it would be that you would focus on these. The deal is there, unfortunately. You have to now work within it because they have received the benefits from it, and then you focus on the issues that are immediately present, and you do that by building an international coalition for a new round of new kinds of pressures, both economic and otherwise, to constrain their activity. The problem, of course, with Donald Trump is because he has done this in this kind of impulsive, fitful way, his actions were immediately criticized by the leaders of France, Germany,
and he has no Secretary of State that anybody believes has any credibility with him, because you can't even deal with the Secretary of State.
And one more point, it is before the deal went into effect, before the sanctions bit, the hard sanctions bit in 2012, Iran's most important trading partners included Japan and India. So any U.S. policy has to loop in those two, which means a very ambitious diplomatic effort of a kind that we have been I don't want to use the word that Corker used, but we have been institutionally debilitated from putting it
We've been gelded by. But let me go back to Gabe really quick.
U.S. to have a Secretary of State who has to go on TV and say, I'm still intact.
Exactly. And I think that's the point I want to bring back with Gabe, because here's the issue. If we were having a normal debate with a normal president who proceeded in the ways that David just laid out, that would imply that you had a normal State Department that could then do the diplomacy with other countries. If the Congress decides to go ahead and unleash new sanctions on Iran, we don't know what would happen, but we do know that the State Department is short about a third of its staff, that we are short many of our international ambassadors, that you don't have a Secretary of State that anybody in their right mind believes has any credibility with the White House. And we also have these new reports, Gabe, that Donald Trump is taking his advice on these issues of foreign policy from people like Sean Hannity and Nikki Haley. This was Nikki Haley, who has no foreign policy experience. She was the governor of South Carolina before she got this job. This is Nikki Haley on Meet the Press this morning responding to the Political report that she is Trump's Iran whisperer.
That is just so much drama. I mean, it's all this palace intrigue. What I'll tell you is every member of the NSC works very hard to put options on the table for the president, and we all work very well together. So I am glad to be living in New York just for that reason, is that I don't want to be near the drama and I don't want to be near the gossip.
Gabe, from your reporting, is Donald Trump taking his Iran advice from Nikki Haley and Sean Hannity?
Well, what I do know is that he does speak to Sean Hannity, and yes, he does think very highly of Nikki Haley. She is a name that comes up as a possible replacement for Rex Tillerson. Another name that has surfaced in my reporting is Mike Pompeo at CIA. So this is clearly a position that Donald Trump is eyeing to fill. Everyone I talk to in and around the administration is not holding their breath that Rex Tillerson will be in the job in the long term. So the idea that he would now be turning to outside voices for his Iran policy makes complete sense. And what I think is just striking, I want to touch on real quick, is the way in which Trump has tried to tamp down this conversation that he is losing control of his administration by sending General John Kelly, the chief of staff, out there this week to give a rare on-camera briefing. I mean, that to me, from my sources, fuels the idea that he is trying to quell this talk, when in fact is just validating the idea that he is struggling to deal with all these pressure points, both domestic and internationally.
Yeah, and not only that, but he hasn't replaced John Kelly at Homeland Security, so that if any consequences were to come from his policy, that this country, there'd be no DHS.
I can't bear it if you leave the equation of Nikki Haley with Sean Hannity on the table. That is so outrageous. Nikki Haley, an accomplished governor of an important...
Does she have any foreign policy experience that would make her an Iran whisperer?
South Carolina is one of the destinations for the largest flows of foreign investment into the United States. She works closely with partners in Europe, NATO partners.
And so you think that she would be perfectly suited?
Biden's endorsing
to
Nikki
give
Haley
advice.
to replace Rex Tillerson.
As our Iran whisperer.
And unlike Sean Hannity, she's super smart. And
what about the combination?
You let this woman apply her brain for 9 months to the Iran problem, I would listen to her, yes. Whereas Sean Hannity's a different.
Here's the formative word that you just used. She's a her. All right. If she replaces Rex Tillerson and she goes into the Department of State, as Secretary of State, we know how Donald Trump looks at women. Is she going to have any more power than Rex Tillerson does? I highly doubt that. I really do. I don't see it happening.
It's not clear from the report, at least from the reporting that we're getting from Gabe.
But I do agree that she's a very smart woman.
Yeah. Maybe you should listen to David Frum. When maybe I don't know.
The Frum doctrine.
Maybe he'll call you since today you were nicer
I'll
than you normally are. All right, David Frum and Rosa Brooks, thank you. Michelle, EJ, and Gabe will all be back. Great panel. And coming up, could Donald Trump's tough talk lead us to actual war? Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson joins us just to keep you even more terrified on this Sunday next.